The wind that night carried the sharp bite of winter, the kind that found its way through even the thickest coats. Adam Hayes kept his hands deep in his jacket pockets, head lowered against the cold as he locked the side entrance of Langford Company. It was past midnight. The city was quiet except for the muffled hum of traffic far below. From the 34th floor, the glittering skyline felt distant, like a world that belonged to someone else. In a way, it did. To the people inside those corner offices, Adam was invisible. A man who moved silently through the halls, fixing what broke and polishing what dulled. He didn't mind. Being overlooked meant fewer questions, fewer chances for anyone to see the wear in his eyes. But to Sophie, his 3-year-old daughter, he was everything. Her laugh was the reason he got up every morning. Her dreams were the reason he stayed late at night. Every shift, every extra hour, every aching joint, he carried them all without complaint because they bought her a life he never had. Tonight had been different, though. The annual anniversary gala had transformed the usually quiet building into a river of silk gowns, tuxedos, and champagne flutes. Music had spilled from the ballroom down the marble corridors, the kind of glittering affair Adam passed by without a second glance. But as he crossed the lobby toward the service elevator, something caught his eye. A figure, slender, poised yet unsteady, stood just outside the glass doors. The pale glow from the streetlight traced over her sequined dress, catching in her hair. Victoria Langford. Even in the blur of fatigue, he recognized her. The CEO herself. She was the kind of woman you didn't forget sharp lines, sharper words, and a presence that seemed to part the air wherever she walked. In 3 years working here, Adam had never seen her like this. Her heels wobbled on the pavement. One hand clutched her phone, the other hovered in the air as if trying to hail a cab that never came. The driver, he realized, was long gone. For a moment, he considered walking away. She was his boss, well beyond his orbit. Whatever her problem was, it wasn't his. But then she stumbled. Instinct overruled hesitation. Adam pushed through the doors into the icy night. "Miss Langford," he said, voice steady. Her head turned slowly, eyes glassy but sharp enough to register his face. "Hayes, right?" The name slid from her lips with the kind of effort that comes after too many glasses of champagne. "You can't stand out here," he said. "It's freezing. Do you need a ride?" She gave a soft, humorless laugh, her breath curling in the cold. "I don't get rides from employees." Then think of me as someone who happens to have a warm truck parked out back." Something in his tone, or maybe the biting wind, pushed her past her pride. She nodded once. The ride to her building was quiet, except for the occasional hum of the heater. Victoria sat with her hands folded tightly in her lap, her gaze fixed on the dark city beyond the window. When they reached her glass and steel high-rise, she hesitated before getting out. "Thank you, Hayes," she murmured, the words soft, almost foreign on her tongue. And then she disappeared into the revolving doors without looking back. Adam watched her vanish into the gleaming lobby before pulling away, certain he'd just stepped into a moment that would fade as quickly as it came. He didn't know that by morning it would change everything. Adam had learned one rule early in life. Nothing good came from a boss asking to see you first thing in the morning. The memory of last night still clung to him as he swiped his ID at the side entrance of Langford Company. The lobby was its usual picture of perfection, polished floors, fresh flowers in tall glass vases, the faint scent of coffee from the executive lounge. But Adam felt the weight of eyes that weren't actually there, the silent judgment of people who'd never noticed him before. He kept telling himself she wouldn't remember. She'd been tipsy, barely coherent. Maybe she'd already filed the night away as an embarrassing blur. But by the time he'd hung his jacket in the maintenance room, his phone buzzed with a message from reception. "Miss Langford would like to see you in her office. Immediately." The walk to the top floor felt like a march toward the gallows. Each step echoed in the marble corridor, past oil paintings worth more than his yearly salary, until he stood before the towering glass doors of her office. Inside, Victoria Langford was already at her desk, a black turtleneck replacing last night's sequined gown. Her hair was swept into a sharp knot, her eyes clear and calculating the woman he knew by reputation. "Mr. Hayes," she said without looking up from her screen, "close the door." He obeyed, standing stiffly in front of her desk. "I trust you got home safely last night?" he asked, breaking the silence. Her gaze lifted to meet his. There was no embarrassment in her expression, only an appraising curiosity. "I did. Thanks to you." He nodded, waiting for the lecture. The warning about boundaries. The quiet threat about keeping what he saw to himself. Instead, she leaned back in her chair. "How long have you worked here?" 3 years. "And before that?" His jaw tightened. "Construction engineering. But that was a lifetime ago." She studied him for a moment, as if filing that away. Then, without preamble, she said, "I'm offering you $6,000 a month." Adam blinked. "Not for maintenance," she said. "For me. Off the record. I need someone who talks to me like I'm not the CEO. No board meetings, no contracts, just conversation. Company. Call it a personal arrangement." He stared at her. "You're serious?" "Entirely. And you don't want—" He hesitated, unsure how to phrase it without sounding crude. "No romance," she said flatly, reading his mind. "This isn't that kind of offer. I don't need a lover, Mr. Hayes. I need someone who sees me." The words hung in the air, heavier than he expected. He thought of Sophie. $6,000 a month could mean better security, more savings for her education, fewer nights wondering if the bills would be paid on time. But something about this didn't make sense. "Why me?" "Because last night you didn't hesitate," she said simply. "You didn't ask why I was standing in the cold. You didn't take a photo. You didn't gawk. You just acted." That's rare. Adam let the silence stretch. Part of him wanted to walk out. Another part, the part that counted pennies at the grocery store, told him this was a chance he'd be a fool to refuse. He finally nodded once. "All right, I'll try it. But I'm not calling you Victoria at work." Her mouth curved just slightly. "Fair enough, Mr. Hayes." As he left her office, the hallway seemed different, like he'd stepped into a game where he didn't yet know the rules. And somewhere deep down, a question began to form. Was this the start of something good, or the beginning of a mistake he couldn't take back? The first week was... Adam wasn't sure what to expect when he agreed to Victoria Langford's arrangement, but it turned out she meant exactly what she'd said. Company, not conversation on demand. No schedule, no formalities, just occasional calls or texts that pulled him away from his usual routes through the building. The first time, it was a coffee shop, a few blocks from Langford & Company. She was already there when he arrived, sitting at a corner table with her phone face down, her posture sharp even in casual clothes. He'd never seen her outside the armor of a boardroom before. Without the tailored suits and the hard lines of corporate power, she looked younger. Almost his age, though he knew she was a couple of years younger than him. "You drink coffee?" she asked when he sat down. "Black," he said. She nodded toward the counter. "Get one. I'll wait." It wasn't exactly warm, but it was a start. For the first 10 minutes, the only sounds were the clink of cups and the hiss of the espresso machine. Adam kept waiting for the moment she'd launch into some monologue about business or charity galas, but instead she asked about Sophie. "How old is she?" 13. "Teenage years," Victoria murmured, as if testing the phrase in her mouth. That must be complicated. Some days, Adam said, a small smile tugging at his lips. Other days, it's the only thing that makes sense. That was their rhythm at first, short exchanges in quiet places. Coffee in the park on Sunday mornings. Walks along the riverbank after his shift. The silences were awkward at first, but over time, they began to feel less like empty space and more like breathing room. It was Sophie who began to break through the rest. One Saturday, Adam had no choice but to bring her along to a park meeting with Victoria. He expected it to be a disaster. Victoria wasn't exactly the kind of person you pictured laughing with a teenager over picnic tables. But Sophie was different. She had a way of treating everyone the same, whether they were a janitor or a CEO. She asked Victoria what her favorite ice cream flavor was, rolled her eyes when she said mint chocolate chip, and then launched into a dramatic defense of vanilla as the superior choice. Adam watched in quiet disbelief as Victoria actually laughed a sound that seemed to surprise even her. After that, the boundaries began to shift. Victoria started stopping by their small apartment for Sunday dinners. Sophie would drag her into the kitchen to help with pancakes, which usually meant Victoria ended up dusted in flour while Sophie grinned in triumph. It wasn't perfect. Victoria still had moments where the CEO mask slipped back into place, where her eyes went distant and her answers short. But every so often, something real broke through a softness Adam hadn't expected, a kind of loneliness that made her seem almost human. And then, one evening, came the moment Adam didn't know how to read. They were walking back from the park, Sophie running ahead to chase the last of the daylight. Victoria slowed beside him, her hands tucked into the pockets of her coat. "Do you ever think," she said quietly, "that some people are put in your life to undo you?" He glanced at her, trying to read the look in her eyes. She met his gaze. Not in a bad way, just in a way that makes you question the person you've been for too long. Before he could respond, Sophie called from ahead, and the moment passed. But Adam couldn't shake the feeling that something in her tone had shifted, like the first crack in a sheet of ice. The day it all shifted began like any other. Adam had spent the morning fixing a faulty light fixture in the executive conference room, his mind half on the job, half on whether Sophie's upcoming science fair project would survive the weekend intact. When he stopped by the apartment in the afternoon to drop off lunch for her, he noticed an envelope on the kitchen counter. Thick paper, expensive. His name printed neatly across the front. Sophie was at the table, head bent over a sketchbook. "Oh, that came for you," she said casually. It was in the mail. He tore it open without thinking. Inside was a tuition receipt. Not just for this semester, for the last 3 years, paid in full, every single term. At the bottom, in bold type, was the name of the payer, Victoria Langford. Adam stared at it for so long Sophie finally looked up. "Dad? You okay?" He forced a smile. "Yeah, just mail mix-up." But his stomach was twisting. That night, when Victoria stopped by for dinner, her now usual Sunday ritual, the tension in Adam's chest had already reached its breaking point. Sophie was at the stove, proudly flipping pancakes, while Victoria stood beside her, watching like the whole thing was a foreign art. Adam waited until Sophie darted into the other room to grab something before speaking. His voice came out sharper than intended. "Why didn't you tell me?" Victoria blinked. He tossed the receipt on the counter. The paper slid toward her like a blade. Her expression barely flickered. "I didn't think it mattered." "Didn't think it?" Adam's voice rose, then fell again, low and controlled. "Do you have any idea what this looks like?" "Yes," she said evenly. "It looks like I made sure your daughter had the education she deserves." "It looks like pity," he shot back. Her jaw tightened. "It wasn't pity." "Then what was it? Guilt? Charity for the poor maintenance guy? She stepped closer, her voice matching his quiet intensity. It was repayment. Whether you believe that or not. The air between them felt like it might shatter. Sophie's footsteps approached from the hallway, her voice bright. Pancakes are ready. Victoria didn't take her eyes off Adam. Enjoy dinner, Mr. Hayes, she said softly, and walked toward the door. The sound of it, closing behind her, was louder than it should have been. That night, after Sophie was asleep, Adam sat in the dark living room, the tuition receipt on the coffee table like a wound that wouldn't close. He thought about her words, repayment, and the flash of something in her eyes that wasn't arrogance or pity, but something heavier. But he was too angry to name it. Over the next few weeks, Victoria didn't call. No coffee, no walks, no Sunday dinners. The space she'd carved into their lives sealed shut again, leaving only the echo of what had been. Until the night of the storm. The rain came hard and fast, turning streets into rivers. Adam had just set a mug of coffee on the counter when a knock rattled the door. When he opened it, Victoria stood there, soaked to the bone, her hair plastered to her cheeks, her coat dripping onto the mat. Her voice broke before she'd even stepped inside. Adam, she said, there's something I need to tell you, and you might hate me for it. Adam stepped aside without speaking. Victoria crossed the threshold slowly, as though unsure if she truly belonged there anymore. The living room light caught the tremor in her hands as she unbuttoned her coat, water pooling at her feet. Sit, Adam said quietly, nodding toward the couch. His voice was calm, but only because the storm outside was already doing all the shouting. She lowered herself onto the cushions, her gaze fixed on the floor. I should have told you years ago, she began, her words nearly drowned out by the rain against the windows. But I was a coward. Adam leaned against the edge of the armchair, arms folded, waiting. You were an engineer at Coleman and Vale Construction, she said, promising career, on track to lead a major project. I know, because Langford and Company was set to invest in that project. Adam's jaw clenched. He remembered the collapse of it all, one corporate decision that cut funding, leaving dozens unemployed. Leaving him scrambling for work, any work, just to keep Sophie's world from falling apart. My father was CEO then, she continued. I was young, eager to prove myself. I'd been pushing him to let me make executive calls. That project was my first chance. I found what I thought was a better investment, and I pulled our funding. Her voice faltered. It tanked the entire build, and when the dust settled, you were one of the names on the list of layoffs. I saw your file. I knew your daughter was barely 10. I knew your wife had passed. Adam stared at her, each word a nail in the memory. So, the tuition payments. She nodded. Penance. I couldn't undo what I'd done, but I could make sure Sophie had the opportunities I'd taken from you. For a moment, neither spoke. The air was thick with everything unspoken. The years of struggle, the quiet humiliation of starting over, the pride that had kept him from ever asking for help. You should have told me, he said finally. I know, she whispered. But I thought, if I did, you'd refuse the money, and I needed to know I was at least doing one thing right. He ran a hand over his face, torn between the urge to send her back into the storm and the weight of the truth settling in his chest. You've been carrying this for years? He asked. Yes. Her eyes glistened, though no tears fell. And somewhere along the way, it stopped being about guilt. You and Sophie, you became something I needed. The words landed like a stone dropped into still water. Adam felt the ripples reach places in him he hadn't wanted touched. The storm outside roared, but inside, the silence was louder. Finally, he moved to the kitchen, pulling a towel from the drawer and tossing it to her. Dry off, he said. We'll figure this out. She caught the towel, her fingers brushing the fabric as if it were more than just cotton, as if it were a lifeline. And for the first time in weeks, the distance between them felt a little smaller. The storm passed, but its memory lingered in the scent of rain that clung to the air for days, and in the way something had quietly shifted between Adam and Victoria. They didn't leap back into whatever they'd been before. Instead, they moved cautiously, as if testing the floorboards of a bridge that had once collapsed beneath them. Conversations were softer. Sunday dinners returned, but with pauses where words had once filled the space. For Adam, trust was not something handed back like a borrowed tool. It had to be rebuilt, plank by plank. For Victoria, it meant showing up without pretense. No gifts, no hidden gestures, just her time, her presence, and the quiet endurance of someone who refused to walk away again. Sophie, as always, was the glue. She never asked about the tension she'd sensed weeks before. She simply pulled them into shared moments, baking cookies, going to the winter fair, dragging them both into ridiculous photo booth sessions where even Victoria laughed without restraint. It was in these small, ordinary moments that Adam began to see her differently. Not as the woman who'd once derailed his life, nor as the CEO who could buy her way out of guilt, but as someone learning how to be human with them. One spring evening, nearly 2 years after that night outside Langford Company, Victoria asked them both to come to the garden behind her townhouse. String lights glowed in the warm dusk, weaving between branches heavy with blossoms. A long table stood beneath the largest tree, its surface lined with candles that flickered in the breeze. Sophie's eyes widened. "Whoa, are we having a party?" Victoria smiled. Something like that. Then she turned to Adam, her voice steady but carrying the faintest tremor. "You once told me trust doesn't come back all at once, that it's earned moment by moment. I hope I've earned yours." Adam didn't speak, but the way his hand closed over hers said enough. She took a breath. "I don't want to be your boss anymore. I want to be your partner. In all the ways that matter." It wasn't a question, but it felt like one. Adam searched her eyes, the same eyes that had once been guarded behind glass and steel, now open and unflinching. The years of anger, pride, and distance seemed to fall away, leaving only the truth. Somewhere between guilt and forgiveness, love had taken root. "Yes," he said simply. Sophie's gasp broke the moment, and before Adam could react, she was hugging them both. "Does this mean I get to call her mom now?" Victoria laughed through the tears welling in her eyes. "Only if you want to." The wedding was small. No ballrooms, no headlines, just friends, family, and a garden strung with the same lights from that spring evening. Sophie walked Victoria down the aisle, grinning like she'd been waiting for this day all her life. When Adam took Victoria's hands, there were no speeches about fate or destiny, only a quiet vow, spoken from the man who had once driven her home in silence, to not just love you, but to keep choosing you every day. And as the lights swayed gently above them, and Sophie's laughter rang out across the garden, Adam realized something he'd never dared believe. Sometimes, the person you least expect to trust becomes the one you can't imagine life without.